Why don't we first take a look at some of the group policy desktop settings.
Okay, we're on Windows Server 2008 Enterprise, and we've been talking about group policy. We've done user logon messages, roaming user profiles, some password policy settings, and user logon messages and things. Today we want to look at group policy and what you can do with desktop settings as far as controlling what the user can and cannot do. And we'll also look at applying multiple group policies and how they apply and how you can filter them. So alternatively we could go to Control Panel and Server Roles and access it that way, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the Microsoft Management Console and add the GPMC that way. Alright, GPMC Group Policy Management Console gives us access to a lot of our group policy settings. And this was introduced after 2003 was released and was available as an optional download. It was a significant improvement over the interface in 2000, but it comes by default with Windows 2008. And it allows you to see a lot of things that the older versions and the Windows 2000 products did not. You can see where a GPO is applied, how it affects other GPOs. You can sort of see the inheritance hierarchy. The inheritance hierarchy starts at the top and moves from left to right. So anything applied at the forest or site level is going to supersede or govern anything that's nested inside of it that would be a child object, such as a domain, and then in that domain anything that would be nested inside of that, such as an organizational unit. Okay, and we'll look at some of the settings in terms of the default domain policy and some settings that we may enable or disable. One of the first things, in order to link or unlink a group policy, you can right-click on it and you can choose whether the link is enabled or disabled. And a group policy will still exist, and you always have the option of applying it, but if you unlink it, then those group policy settings will not apply once you do a GPO update and that policy is refreshed. Enforce is an option, and if I choose Enforce, this is basically the no override option from the Windows 2000 and also when 2003 was first released until you installed the GPMC. They changed that to the enforced option. What that does is there's another option in group policy we can utilize called block policy inheritance. But if we use that option, if we've used enforce on a group policy that's above it, then it will override those settings. Of course, there's the edit command, which brings up the group policy that we can edit. And here will be all of our group policy settings. Okay, I'm going to uncheck that for now, but we'll come back and explore that in a moment. That enforced option, again, it will override a no override option. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new group policy over SuperSpice, and we'll look at the inheritance, and we'll call this, we'll just call this desktop policy and SuperSpy desktop policy. Okay. And now in this case we have a SuperSpy desktop policy that's enabled on SuperSpies. Now one of the things I could do, I could choose this option here, block inheritance. See how the little blue exclamation point appears there? If I block policy inheritance, then even though I have a policy defined here, normally the way it goes is, okay, if we have a GPO applied here on a parent object and then a GPO on a child object, the group policy here and the group policy here will be cumulative. As long as the settings aren't conflicting, in other words, if it's not defined here and it is defined here, then these two policies will combine and give me a cumulative set of group policy. But if they conflict, the policy applied last, in this case this policy, would always supersede this policy. Now in addition, I could also block policy inheritance, and if I do that here, then any conflicting setting here that would normally this policy, since it's being applied later than this policy, would be dominant. If I were to do this, none of the group policy settings would be applied. But if I were to do this, if I were to enforce the default domain policy, even though I'm blocking group policy here, these policy settings will still be applied. I will not be able to override them, even though I'm using block inheritance right here. So just kind of a brief description of those options, but we'll disable both of those. And let's take a look at combining group policies, the inheritance hierarchy, and sort of at a cumulative level. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this policy, and we'll make a few changes. Right click, I'm going to say edit, And we're going to go set up some desktop policies here. And what we want to do is get into administrative templates. And one of the first things we want to do is set up some sort of a mandatory wallpaper. We'll use some mandatory company wallpaper here. So one of the settings that I want to enable, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go ahead and click on Enable Active Desktop. This needs to be enabled for me to enforce my wallpaper, HTML and JPEG wallpaper. I'm going to go ahead and define that policy setting. And let me see if I can stretch this over a little bit so that you can see. I got my resolution tweaked down here so that it'll hopefully be large enough that you can actually see things when it's compressed. But you can see now that its state has been enabled. We don't want to, really configure this, or you want to make sure it's disabled. You do not want to disable Active Desktop if you're going to enforce wallpaper. And then what I can do is for the desktop wallpaper, I'm going to go ahead and enable it. And now here's the deal. I don't want to use an absolute path. An absolute path would be like C:, wallpaper, and then the wallpaper. And the reason is because if this wallpaper is going to be, mandatory across the network, it needs to be reachable via UNC, so a network share, not an absolute path, but a relative path. So not C:, but let's go over here. So what I want to do is make that wallpaper available via a network share. So I'll go to Explorer, and I want to grab my wallpaper. In this case, what I have here, and let's go ahead and move it. And we'll share out a directory here called wallpaper. We'll call it company wallpaper, or how about TS wallpaper, or top secret. I'm going to put my wallpaper in here, and now we need to configure share and NTFS permissions properly for this to work correctly. So I'm going to go to Properties, and under Security, I just want to make sure that authenticated users, which are domain users, have at least read access. They need read and list folder contents access. Under my sharing level permissions, I'm going to go ahead and go into sharing now. I want to share this folder. We'll just leave it as TS wallpaper. For permissions, let's say I don't want everybody to get the wallpaper, but I do want domain users. And remember, everyone by default is added to that domain users group, and they don't need to be able to delete or change or modify the wallpaper. They just need to be able to read it to apply it to their desktop. So I will say OK, and OK, and OK. And now I'm shared. Notice this little sharing icon here. And now I want to get the UNC path, or network path to that. So I'll just type in my host name. And with my host name typed in, I want to go over to TS wallpaper. And then I'll click on my address bar up here, and I can just grab this and copy it as a string of text. And what I want to apply is this JPEG here, mandatory ts.jpg. Alternatively, what's more compatible with Windows is the bitmap, but the GIF, less colorful, but a little bit, the file size will be a little bit smaller. We'll go with the JPEG, for the color and the file size isn't so large there. Because with the mandatory, desktop wallpaper, you realize that will be some traffic generated on your network to enforce this policy until it's cached on the machine. So go ahead and close that. Let's go back here. Now what I want to do is I want to paste the relative UNC path here, and TS. And again, we just want to make sure, I want to go back and make sure that that's exactly what the name of the file is. Otherwise it won't work. So TS wallpaper, we've got our path. Oh, a mandatory ts.jpg. Good thing I checked. And this will be our mandatory wallpaper. And we can set the style, we can center it, we can stretch it, we can tile it. We'll try to stretch it in this case. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it. And apply this setting.
Here we'll configure a few more options to lock down the desktop.
So far I've enabled Active Desktop as a group policy, and I've set up desktop wallpaper and sort of made a mandatory wallpaper. Now, well, not mandatory wallpaper yet, but this will be the a default wallpaper. Now what we can do is let's configure a few more options here to sort of lock down the desktop. So adding, deleting items on the desktop will disable that capability or that feature. We'll prohibit editing items, and we'll prohibit deleting items, and prohibit adding items. Won't do prohibit changes. Well, maybe later if we decide to do that. These are just some of the desktop settings. Again, remove user from manually redirecting profile folders. Hide and disable all items on desktop. We don't want to do that, but remove the desktop cleanup wizard. Let's do that. Hide Internet Explorer icon on desktop. We could do that if we want, or we could enable a toolbar. Actually, we'll leave Internet Explorer. Let's remove the computer icon. In this case, remove my documents. We'll leave that. They don't really need to go to computer, hide network locations. We could do that, but we won't. Remove properties from the computer icon context menu. Let's do this. We'll remove the recycle bin, and that way they can't permanently delete things. That will give them a little bit extra measure of protection. They would have to call us, and maybe IT would come and delete their objects or documents or things. But that way, if they needed them recovered, we could. Of course, there are a lot more recovery options with network file servers and shares using shadow copy with the advent of 2003, but that's just an option. Prohibit adjusting desktop toolbars, and we could enable that, and that would stop us from adjusting toolbars. So they're just some of the desktop settings that we could lock down under our different users here. So I'm going to go ahead and save. We'll close this group policy setting and save it. And now it's saved and defined as SuperSpy desktop policy. So we have two conflicting policies. The default domain policy does not apply these desktop restrictions, and it's at it's farther out in terms of the inheritance hierarchy. So it's farther up. It's a parent object, the domain. Here, just on an OU. In SuperSpy, we've configured a GPO that's at a lower level. It's at a child object, but it would be applied in this order. The domain policy would be applied, and then the OU policy. So without enforce or block policy inheritance, these policies will combine, and where they conflict, these policies should override these policies here. And let's go ahead and there are other ways. Let's say that we also want to filter this policy on a certain user. We'll do that, and the way to do that, basically you have to be able to read a group policy object to be able to apply it. So if you want to filter a group policy on a user, now if we were to say block policy inheritance, that would block it, policy inheritance for an entire OU. But we're going to filter one OU on this, and it'll be Tesla. Let's go ahead and add Tesla. We'll add Tesla here. And okay, and now Tesla has read permission. What we're going to do, I'll look at let's go over to advanced view here, and now with Tesla added, we're going to explicitly deny him the read permission and apply group policy permission. And if we do this, then that means these policy settings will not apply to Tesla. Again, Windows is warning us. Now we could also simply uncheck. We could implicitly deny, and it would have the same effect of filtering him. But this way, this is a stronger sort of denial. So if he's got multiple group membership and another group had membership that was allowed to read that GPO, it would still be applied to Tesla, even though we had only implicitly denied it here. But since we explicitly denied it, we'll filter it on his object alone, no matter how many groups he's a member of. This GPO will not apply to him. We just want to edit the DACL there. Another thing we'll want to do, we'll apply this to the northern hemisphere, but let's say we wanted to filter. Nobody in the southern hemisphere should have a lockdown desktop for some reason. Well, what we could do is block inheritance at this level, and this would block any of these policies from being enforced on this setting. So let's test this out now. We want to check for a few things. We want to see, we'll log in maybe as one of our agents. Let's log in as Let's log in as Tesla and see if he's filtered. He's in research. Then we'll log in as Einstein, who's not filtered, and it should be applied to Einstein, should not be applied to Tesla. And then let's see if we can block policy inheritance here and log in maybe as one of our research or top agents in the Southern Hemisphere. So with all of these group settings, group policy settings modified, I'm going to close the group policy console. And we won't save the console settings. Your GPO is saved, by the way. That was just asking me if I wanted to save the console settings. I could just type GP update, but I want you to see what's happening, so I'm going to open a command prompt first. And GP update. Remember, every time we change group policy, we want to use the command GP update. And now we'll log in and out as different users. So again, let's check our users and see what should happen, and then we'll see what does happen with GPO update being applied. Okay, from Northern Hemisphere, our GPO is applied, but remember Tesla was filtered on. We edited the DACL. He doesn't have read permission on the GPO, so he's filtered out. In this case, Einstein should have the effect of the desktop being locked down and the settings applied because he's not filtered out, and the GPO will apply to him. He gets it by inheritance because he's a child OU of SuperSpies, and the GPO is applied up here at SuperSpies. Now it conflicts with the domain GPO, but remember that the last policy applied is dominant, and we didn't use the enforce option here. So in this case, it should override those non-restrictive settings. Now remember, we used block policy inheritance on Southern Hemisphere. So in this case, none of our users here should be affected. So if we log in as SHAdmin, then he should not have that restriction applied to him. However, NHAdmin will have that desktop policy or restriction policy applied to him. And we'll test this out on our Vista client workstation.
Now let's test our new group policy on an Active Directory domain client workstation.
We're on our Vista workstation now. Let's test a few things out. So let's pick an account where the restricted desktop GPO has not been applied to. In this case, that would be the administrator account for Pirates. So on our Vista workstation client, we'll log in as administrator real quick and check his desktop. Let's see what he can do, what he cannot do. Okay, and pretty much have a standard Vista desktop logged in as administrator of Pirates. We have shutdown capabilities, desktop capabilities. We have access to my computer. I can use the management console, and if I want to, let's go here, let's go to personalize, desktop background. I love that beautiful background there, just the way that I guess the gradients are in this images. But let's say we wanted to make our background a solid color. How about a really annoying Pepto-Bismol pink? You can always tell somebody's angry when they make their, or maybe there are people who actually like that color. But alright, sorry, that was okay. So anyway, we do have permission to change our desktop background, and we're not really restricted in these settings, so we can tell that GPO is not applying to this user. So I'm going to log off. Now I'm going to log on as a user who that GPO does apply to. So remember, if you will, that Einstein was in the research child OU, which is in the Northern Hemisphere child OU, which is in the SuperSpies parent OU. So let's go ahead and switch the user there. And we'll log in as parents Einstein. I believe he had a simple password, but I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. That was after we changed the password complexity policy in the default domain GPO. So he's got a simple password, just 4 characters, PASS, all lowercase. We're logging in. Now this time, notice it's going to apply it'll actually apply the group policy or GPO settings to Einstein. Even though he has the domain GPO applied to him, he's in a child OU with the GPO, and that's applied after the domain GPO. So because of this, in this conflict, the way it's resolved is the last group policy applied is dominant. So he gets this mandatory wallpaper instead of the default Vista wallpaper, top secret, domain pirates, Linux Online for your eyes only. And again, we want to go ahead and close this, and let's see what he has access to. Notice that my computer has disappeared. So you can't right-click on my computer and go to the management console that way. So this policy is applying to him. Let's try to change, see if we can change the background in any fashion or form. And we could try to apply this. Notice here's our picture location, TS wallpaper, but let's try Windows wallpapers. And I kind of like that one, kind of like that one. Try to go with the default there. And again, it has no effect in this case. And some corporate environments are more liberal than others, but you may work in an environment where they just want to make sure that everybody's desktop is uniform and maybe it looks good. You walk in the office and see all the cubicles with all their wallpaper the same or the company logo. Or maybe they just want to keep people from putting anything offensive on their desktop that might, bother someone who's walking by, who knows. Or in a school setting, obviously that might be useful in a school setting where children would be tempted to engage in acts of profanity or graffiti or other types of defacement of the desktop. So we're going to log out, and I'm going to log in as one more user. Now remember that we filtered on Tesla. We unchecked the read and apply group policy options. That would be an implicit denial, and we also explicitly denied him the ability to read the group policy object and to have it applied to him. That's how you filter, and when you filter, that's useful if, say we just had one particular user, in this case Tesla. We didn't want to, block policy inheritance and filter out all the users, Einstein and whoever other research scientist was, but we just wanted to filter it on one user, Tesla. Because, we trust him, we know he's not going to offend anybody, Tesla. So let's log in as Tesla and see if this policy, this GPO, has been filtered on his user account. So we'll walk in here. Logging in. And again, notice, even though he's in that OU, the same OU that Einstein was in, our restrictive group policy object, our desktop GPO, does not apply to Tesla because he was filtered. So he doesn't have permission to read that GPO, so therefore the GPO can't apply to him. He has, computers there. He has the default wallpaper. He has permission to change his wallpaper if he wants to. All of those settings do not apply to him. So there's two basic ways we can, block a group policy. We can choose block policy inheritance, but the problem is that blocks it for everybody in the whole OU. But if there's just one specific user, notice he can choose different backgrounds. But if there's just one specific OU, or one person in an OU, that you want to block a GPO from applying to, then in that particular situation, filtering would be a better option. And he's kind of a nice little lavender desktop there.